We're asking all the toughest questions so that we can get inside their heads.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us live on Fresh FM Sunday night. You're joining us live here. This is DJ DD Benz coming at you live Sunday night, 7:30 with Politically Inclined. Tonight we're in studio with a very special guest, which we will get to in just a moment. But before we do, we have a few announcements as usual. So here it goes, and we apologize for our rather peculiar audio glitches just a moment ago. It seems that the curse of our other DJs is carried on to DD Benz in his studio tonight. That being said, make sure you check us out on YouTube, folks. If you are a friend of Politically Inclined, or you're interested in the show, make sure you check us out on YouTube at Fresh Politics. Likewise, make sure you check us out on Twitter at Fresh Politics. Lots of valuable information on there. You'll be receiving plenty of updates on new guests up and coming for the show, as well as any updates as far as news and so forth. So make sure you check us out again at Fresh Politics on Twitter, and also on YouTube at Fresh Politics. In case you missed one of our broadcasts, we always upload a video stream of our in-studio activity here, so you can see what's really going on and discover that I'm not just a face for radio, I also have the looks. That being said, we're going to move on with the show, but just before we do, a reminder to check out Get Buck on Mondays on Fresh FM. And once again, a big shout out to everybody who's joining us now for our show. Getting to our special guest tonight in studio, we have Michelle Robinson, who's an activist and an advocate for the Liberal Party of Canada. And Michelle, say hello to our guests and welcome to the studio.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here. And hello out there. Thanks for listening.
Excellent. And Michelle, tell us a little bit about your history with your involvement as an activist with the Liberal Party of Canada, and sort of what you do.
Well, I actually started getting active after I had my child. And I didn't start out with the Liberal Party of Canada. I actually worked locally on a few different issues before joining the Liberal Party of Canada. I decided when I seen some of Harper's policies that seemed to go against what I believe he originally said he stood for, I thought I better start building up a little more democracy in my area, because as it was, we had no healthy EDAs for the Liberals, the Greens, the NDP, or any other party. The only one that seemed to be active was the Communist Party. And I don't think that average Canadians really understand the Communist Party, or therefore would ever vote for them.
Yeah, and it seems that there's a lot of smaller parties that don't get a lot of mainstream recognition. It's always the partisan affiliations that seem to have all the attention. Mm-hmm. We actually had a show on that a couple of weeks ago with regards to partisan versus post-partisan politics. Thank you, Jeff, once again for joining us for that, if you're listening. But it seems like a lot of these mainstream parties are getting all the attention while the little guys seem to sort of struggle. I myself was involved with Progressive Canadian Party of Canada, and we ran into that problem. Nobody really knew who we were, and we were just sort of little guy. But obviously, you're advocating and trying to create awareness, and create electoral districts within the party, so that there's sort of more of a voter base for them. Obviously,
you can't have accountable and transparent government with no voice and keeping them accountable and transparent. So if we have, like say in my area, Calgary East, we have one Conservative MP, nobody is keeping him accountable and transparent because there's not established EDAs of all the different parties to do so. So unless it's coming straight from the Liberal leader or the NDP leader or the critics, then we're not having accountability. And for every single riding, there should be somebody keeping that MP accountable and transparent. So in a healthy democracy, we need to have healthy EDAs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so brings us to the topic of tonight's discussion, the recent developments with the Harper government and the Canada Economic Action Plan. Specifically, we're going to be focusing tonight on pages 145 and 146 of the new Economic Action Plan and some of the items that were brought forward by our Finance Minister, Jim Flaherty. Michelle, would you mind enlightening us a little bit about some of the unusual things that were brought to light with that?
Well, when I opened this up, I actually had a friend of mine who was a fellow activist bring this to my attention. And if it wasn't for him, I don't know how long it would have taken me to find this out. But he basically brought me to page 144 and 145 of the Economic Action Plan, where it talks here about risk management framework for domestic systematically important banks. And what really brought my attention and caused me to raise my eyebrows was on page 145 when they started to talk about the bail-in regime for systematically important banks. Now, why does this matter? Of course, you know, the line you're going to get from the government is that this is fine, this is safe, this is unlikely. However, the fact that they put it into their economic plan suggests that we need to be aware of it. So how many people know what a bail-in regime is? Well, we've seen this very recently in Cyprus. And what a bail-in regime means is a bail-in regime means that any amounts in a bank are no longer yours. They're actually owned by the bank. Now, in some cases, anything that was $100,000 or less was insured, but not in all cases. So what we were seeing was people trying to take out money and being incapable of doing so. And if they wanted to take out, say, more than $300, it needing to go to a board for approval. So Canadians, especially the middle class, especially small business owners, they need to be aware of this, because in the case of any type of financial instability, their accounts could be seized.
Yeah, and so ultimately, what's been portrayed with regards to this bail-in plan is obviously, there wasn't a lot of media coverage, great awareness of this topic for obvious reasons. They don't want a lot of people knowing that their financial accounts are at risk, because that would ultimately create some instability in the financial system. And I guess I, being a small business owner as well, it concerns me, because my hard work and my efforts can be seized at any given time when the Bank of Canada or any of these mainstream banks declare that, well, we're in a state of emergency and we need the funds to keep us afloat. And how am I protected, and what assurance do I have, or what return am I getting on that money by helping them sustain myself? And the answer to that is absolutely nothing.
Absolutely. It was Mark Carney who is in charge of the Bank of Canada and will soon be going to the Bank of England, and who also had ties to the American financial institutes. He's the one who has said that the G20 financial key players are all advocating for these bail-in. And he said in his remarks about financial reforms here that despite the proclamations of the G20 leaders, investors seem to think that governments will once again blink faced with failing large banks. In part, this reflects the need to legislate, not merely propose. So, in a sense, Harper is listening to Mark Carney here by deciding to go ahead with this. Mark Carney claimed that there are no Canadian banks on the current list. Well, to be fair, it does say here that it is an unlikely event of systematic important banks being depleted of capital. However, I think as Canadians, we all want to have stability, and knowing that this is on the table does create instability, particularly with small business, particularly with Loonie. So now, Mark Carney did say that there should be initial recommendations shortly with public consultation, but I certainly don't remember there being any public consultation with any type of business about a bail-in. So I'm very concerned that this is just being rammed through, and not even the other political parties are noticing this.
And that is a definite concern. It seems that the conservative way is just to sort of sweep things under the rug and not really consult the public, or get a public poll or any sort of feedback from the general population. They just sort of want to do what they want to do. And If that includes favoring major corporations while screwing the little guy, by all means, they'll do it.
That's right. There's actually a video that I was watching from the Canadian Awareness Network, and it's titled "Mark Carney, the Architect of Cyprus-Style Bail-ins," which elaborates a little more on the G20 concept of, this is something that was discussed and implemented. The more research I did, the more I actually found out that Europeans are also going to be affected by this. When I was looking into global research, they put out this excellent article, and they talked about how below 100,000 euros would be protected, above 100,000 euros is not protected, and they say that it's set up right now that they should be getting out of Europe if you have any money. Otherwise, your money will be trapped there. Some of the most endangered banks are the largest ones in the world. European banks are especially troubled. And they're all in near the same condition as the Cyprus banks were a year ago. The three major banks have E ratings, others approaching them. So this is something that's going to start happening, I think, systematically. And Canada may not be considered one of the larger countries that would be affected by this, but it's always a downhill. And if we're at the bottom, we will be affected.
Absolutely. And strategically speaking, it doesn't seem too coincidental with the sudden collapse of the banking system in Cyprus, opening doors for the announcement of these bail-in programs. And suddenly, everybody seems to have one before too long. I mean, with the amount of time it takes to pass legislation, it seems that this was all sort of pre-orchestrated in a sense.
Oh, that's exactly it. So what happened with the bailouts is that for whatever reason, we decided here in North America we were not going to actually jail our bankers. We were just going to allow them to get away with what they're getting away with, and in fact give them taxpayers' money in the sense of bailouts. As it was put on economic indicators, a fellow by, a group, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, put out a paper. And in here, they have a great quote here from a fellow named McDonald. Let me just find his whole name, but it basically says the federal government claims it was offering the banks liquidity support, but it looks an awful lot like a bailout to me. Whatever you call it, Canadian government aid for the country's biggest banks is far more indispensable than the official line would suggest. So the reason why I bring this up is because we have already given them taxpayers' money, and they realize they're going to need a contingency plan because there's not a way that the taxpayers are going to allow us to do this again, when rightfully we should have just jailed them anyway. So I think the bail-in idea is exactly where they want to go, and even Harper tries to say in the economic action plan that by having a bail-in as opposed to a bailout, it reduces risks for taxpayers. Now, while it's not technically coming out of the taxpayers' bank accounts that we give them in taxes, it is directly coming out of their purse. So it's being stolen instead through taxpayers' money, through our purses directly. So I find it ironic that he would even have such a funny statement in there.
Definitely, and for a free and democratic country, it seems like the legislation here is, without question, giving the government, the banks, and the major corporations direct license to steal from the little guys.
Yeah, Harper said that when you elect me, you wouldn't recognize Canada after I'm done with it, and he is definitely holding true to that.
Most definitely, and it seems like he's doing a very good job not only of making Canada hard to recognize, but also making us a little less popular on the world spectrum. More recently, issues with the United Nations as far as the ratings and popularity in Canada. We slipped from, I believe it was the 3rd position down to number 11. Mm-hmm. This is just a glowing example of how Stephen Harper is keeping his promise, but when he said that we wouldn't recognize Canada when he is done with it, we just didn't realize that he was going to change it not for the better, but for the worse.
It's a sad reality. Now, not all hope is lost here. There's a lawsuit right now against Canada, and the Bank of Canada by a Canadian constitutional lawyer and 2 Canadians, and they're on behalf of the Committee for Monetary and Economic Reform. And they filed the action against the federal court to restore the use of the Bank of Canada in its original purpose by exercising public statutory duty and responsibility. And the purpose was to create interest-free loans. So basically what happened, a little bit of history, way back in 1974 under Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and at the time John Turner was finance minister, we went from the Bank of Canada, which gave us very low interest rates to none, to going to the banking cartel that we have now, where we pay our compound interest. So we're hoping that this particular lawsuit, of course you're not hearing anything about it even though it's over a year old, that some good will come of this, because then that way we're not paying extra in interest rates that are unnecessary.
Most definitely, and I appreciate you referring to them as the banking cartel, because when it comes right down to it, what they're doing to Canadians is absolutely criminal.
Yeah.
They are being given, as I said, license to steal from the little guys, while the big guys get all the protection of the tax breaks and even the permission to basically use any form of tax haven they can to avoid even paying tax. It's keeping the money at the top. The original proposed purpose of the Conservatives' budget agenda was supposedly that they were going to create a sort of a trickle-down theory, and that would help stimulate the economy by better funding for social programs, and economic situation in Canada would improve.
Yep.
Ultimately, they've done just the opposite, where they've taken what Canada's economic situation was and made it worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
And they've done that by depriving the little guys and favoring the big guys, and taking care of the 1%ers, while the rest of us are sort of left to fend for ourselves, and it's only getting worse.
Well, and I wasn't kidding when I said cartel, and I also wasn't kidding when I said that we should be throwing these people in jail. As far as I'm concerned, it's absolute theft, and why our politicians will actually back up these thieves, I don't understand.
They're guys supposed like me can't get elected.
Yeah, well,
the little guy.
They are supposed to be representing the people, and yet I was recently at Stephen Harper's office, and they purposely locked us out, and we even had an appointment. So the idea that in a democracy you're coming to a locked MP's door shows that we are no longer in a democracy, and that these people do no longer represent us.
Right,
So,
and if you had made the appointment under the Bank of Canada, they would have had the doors open and the coffee ready.
absolutely. So that, I think the fact that we didn't throw these people in jail, we didn't make changes that would allow that to never happen again. These are indications that the Canadian people are not running their money anymore. So I think we need to really take a step back and start looking at this. Not too long ago, there was this video of this 12-year-old girl, and she literally discusses all of this, and she breaks down our banking situation and how upsetting it is. And if a 12-year-old girl can understand it, I know the rest of taxpayers can. So we need to make changes in our system right now before it gets worse, before we end up with this bail-in concept.
Absolutely, and it's funny you mentioned that video of the 12-year-old girl. I have seen that. It is available on YouTube. 12-year-old girl explains the financial system in Canada. It's actually extremely informative and quite accurate, to say the least. What I found most interesting about that is that people weren't ready for the information. There was a lot of chastisement over that, saying that this young girl didn't know what she was talking about, and that she'd been coached.
Yeah, I think the upsetting thing about that, and I see it in the Liberal Party, where I have people who are economics majors and think they understand economics, and they just toe the party line in many ways. They toe the banking line of doing things and not really taking a step back and looking at how it's affecting the people. And people can say that the 12-year-old was coached, but I would disagree with that. I would say that a lot of parents are waking up their children about the situation and the reality that the kids are about to face It's no different than any parent teaching the Bible to their children and having their children have a really good understanding of Jesus Christ or the Quran, any other religion that you may think of. And there is no difference in educating your child in this way. So the idea that this child may have been coached, while it is possible, I don't believe that's true. I believe that they've just taught the child what's really happening in Canada, and a lot of people don't look into it, so they actually don't know it's true. Rather than say she's wrong, I would rather see them try to debunk it.
Absolutely, and I mean, I myself am in agreement with what you're saying, and it seems to me that children of this generation need to be educated because of what's coming.
Yes.
We're facing a catastrophe, and it's probably the greatest economic collapse that's sort of impending in history since the Great Depression, and it's being caused solely by the financial system, who's trying to take advantage of and exploit any opportunity they can to continue to do so, to exploit and take advantage of. And as you say, they're a cartel. They're being not only licensed by the government to commit blatant fraud and get away with it, but also at the same time they're being given permission to basically run the country. And it's almost become a position where the politicians, rather than being for the people, are just puppets for the major corporations and the banksters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we see that in almost every industry. There's not, the banking is not alone. One of the videos I was also going to recommend is just a small little short by Dan Dix of Press for Truth, and it's called "The Case Against the Bank of Canada" by Dan Dix, and I would actually argue it's the case for the Bank of Canada once you watch and go through the whole thing. And just to give our listeners some hope, there is a bank accountability campaign through Democracy Watch right now. And I just signed a petition, and they sent me back an email with some excellent recommendations for change. Now, unfortunately, some of these recommendations have been recommended before, even over 30 years. So, we're obviously not seeing enough changes being done to, make some true change. And one of my favorite changes that they want is point number 9. Given that each of the big banks makes billions each year, increase the maximum penalty for violating the Bank Act from the too low amount of $500,000 to the more effective penalty of $50 million. We could have more bank accountability. We really could be throwing these bankers in jail, but it does take more of the people to stand up and say something. So whether that's just joining a network, whether that's them signing a petition, whether that's starting dialogue with their neighbors, friends, and family, we all have options to create change. And I would start encouraging people to, begin reading more, begin talking about this more. One of the people I'm most concerned about with this Bail-in concept is my own mother-in-law, but I have to slowly show her some information in order to get her there ready to understand the gravity of why having a certain amount of money is in one place can be a hindrance.
Absolutely, and my big recommendation, I've been sending notices to all my friends and everything else, basically telling them since the announcement of this program that the banks are on the verge of a financial collapse, to pull your money from the account as soon as you can, mm-hmm. before it's too late, and to be able to put that into, if you are going to use cash, put it into a working safe, keep it in your own house, and be your own bank. Mm-hmm. Because at least that way you have the security of knowing where your money is going and how it's being used, and you have the ability to control that. The only purpose that should remain for the banks right at this point is for people to go in, cash their check, collect the money they're owed, and walk out. Mm-hmm. Because we're on the verge of a system where even the money system itself is on the brink of collapse, and people are turning to alternative options. One of the biggest sources that I found out about recently was a new currency system called the Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Bitcoin, but it's a very unique system. It declares that they are not affiliated in any way, shape, or form with any financial institution. They are independent, and that The sole purpose is to create a new system of financial transactions where people can send money between users to themselves, and they can do so without paying massive fees, and everything is publicly accessible and traceable. Each individual transaction has a unique ID which is logged in their central database, and it's accessible to every user on their network. So there is no way to hide money, and there is no way to move money around. If you send money to a friend and that friend sends that money to somebody else, it's a matter of public record. You can see exactly who they've been dealing with, and to me that gives me security because I know where my money is going and how it's being used.
Yeah, that's called accountability and transparency, which is part of the problem that we're having right now. And this was another great quote from McDonald where he said, well, this wasn't a quote yet, but it says, due to government secrecy, the study raises more questions than it answers. McDonald's calls on the Bank of Canada and the CMHC to release the full details of how much support each Canadian bank received during the bailout, when they received it, and what they put up as collateral. And here's the quote. He says, a healthy and resilient banking sector cannot operate under the shroud of secrecy. Details of the massive taxpayer support Canadian banks received should be released in the name of transparency and accountability, says McDonald. Financial sector regulation should be strengthened to prevent the need for similar measures in the future. So we have a situation where, because we don't have that open, transparent governance, and it is shrouded in secrecy, that we can't make recommendations to stop this from happening again. So Mark Carney, in all of his wisdom with the G20's other financial advisors all collaborating, have decided that they were going to do a bail-in system without public consultation. And these are the problems that we're facing as a nation, and things that we need to start stepping up against, because this is our money. And taxpayer money paid for this bailout. But now that our money is in accounts, they want to start stealing it. And we cannot have this. There needs to be a stop to this immediately. So whether it's people write their MPs, start their petitions, we do need to start going in that direction. And now you were talking about other ways of doing things, and I do like the BIT system. There's also the Calgary dollar that's local. Many people want to start going towards that, and I think there will just start being exchanges of services and such, because that's what has been done previously in times of I don't know, evil.
that's a good way of putting it, evil. And definitely, I mean, as you were saying, the Calgary dollar, and even more and more people are rampantly moving towards the bartering system, where they're taking items of equal or comparable value and trading them for other items that they need. I mean, a great example, I actually have been kind of lately hooked on that trading frenzy, and I've traded my way up from a gold ring to the point now where I've got somebody offering to trade me a car for a watch.
Oh, that's great. See, and they can steal our money, but ultimately we still have to live and survive. You know, I know a lot of people who grow gardens, and you know, the food prices are rising ridiculously. So we are getting to the point where we're all going to have to start growing our own gardens, and you know, canning, and then trading our food for things. So you know, we have survived. We will survive this, and I hope we will start throwing our politicians and, well, the bankers and the politicians who protect them in jail. You know, a lot of people look up to the Mark Carneys and the Stephen Harpers of the world, and I hope that when they start seeing all of the desperation and pain and suffering that their policies have created, that maybe then they'll see the need to start doing some serious reform that actually protect the people, starting at the very minimum with these 9 points.
Most definitely, and honestly, I have a slightly stronger opinion than Michelle on this. I think that right now, the way that they are screwing us financially and everything else, that the banksters deserve a cushy home 6 feet under in a grave with some dirt on top. Would just be the perfect place to store them for an indefinite period of time.
The thing is if we don't start doing reforms and we don't start having judicial accountability, people will start taking matters into their own hands, and these people will be found dead. And I don't want to see that. I would rather see these people be held responsible in a court of law.
And I mean, it's coming to the point, as you said, the concept of vigilante justice is on the rise. Police are becoming less and more sparse and less available for regular civilian emergencies, and they're becoming far more readily available for the needs of corporations who say that they need protection and security because they feel unsafe because of their mistakes. And frankly, they're being used as corporate thugs.
Absolutely. And the suicide of the little girl in Halifax is a great example of this, where in less than 2 hours, Anonymous was able to uncover all of the rapists and the people that have been giving this girl all of these awful harassing emails, and which also include child porn within them. And yet the RCMP couldn't seem to do this with, over a year worth of investigation. So
not for lack of trying, obviously.
Well, obviously their priorities are not with the people. They have typically been using their tickets as a way as revenue generation for the cities, for the municipalities, for province, for nations. So I think we have to start really looking at our police forces again and asking them what their role is in our society, whether it is we need to abolish the RCMP in their divisions, or if we need to do something different. I have a lot of respect for the Calgary Police Service. I think that they have a lot of community ties that make them accountable. So, when I came from a town that had the RCMP, and those people did not have any ties, and they were harassing all of the teenagers, they were harassing all of the tourists, and it wasn't a family environment. So, I see need for reforms with the RCMP because of the harassment they have internally with their own women, the lack of accountability when it came to, and especially out in Saskatchewan and Winnipeg, where there are so many cases of natives being taken out of the cities, their jackets being taken away in awful -30 conditions, and them being told to walk back. There being deaths associated with that. We have the missing and murdered Aboriginal women. I'm not convinced that our RCMP are working for the people anymore.
No, they're not, and it's quite apparent by the name that the RCMP stands for, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, that they are accountable to Her Majesty the Queen. And if I had to give them any kind of an acronym for that, the direction they're going is obviously that instead of being the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they're more along the lines of Royal Corruption Made Possible.
Yeah, they're historically were founded so that the railway could be made. And there are historical documents basically showing them forcing people who had not been paid for days and days to going back to work and creating that railway. So I have to look in the history books and dig a bit, but you can find the corruption has been from their inception.
Absolutely, and as I said, Royal Corruption Made Possible is really the root history of the RCMP itself, and unfortunately we are drawing closer and closer to what some would call a police state. It just seems inevitable with especially the implementation of legislations permitting that any protest group can now be declared an illegal protest, and those protesters, if found being associated with that group, can be unlawfully detained and labeled a terrorist.
Mm-hmm. In 2006, Harper had allowed the RCMP to start surveillance of all First Nations in the sense that he wanted to start to label them eco-terrorists. So by just simply being a card-carrying First Nation, by simply having that, you are subjected to more surveillance by the RCMP, just to make sure that you're not an eco-terrorist. So another idea of sovereignty that I have an issue with is there was a pact made between Obama and Harper that in the case of an emergency, Harper will allow the U.S. government to come up and help us
Yes, I remember that. The specific legislation was that they were permitting U.S. Rangers to cross into Canadian territory and have full jurisdiction, and that just further alludes to the fact that we are headed towards that inevitable police state.
Yeah, and if you look right now, the Obama drones that he has dispatched are allowed 30 miles into Canadian territory for surveillance purposes. So, when we start talking about loss of sovereignty, these are major issues. The idea that the U.S. has full jurisdiction over Canada in case of emergency is something that should scare every Canadian, especially after the example of Hurricane Katrina.
Well, it's an interesting that you brought that up about the U.S. having full jurisdiction. I actually was doing a little bit of research on this myself last week, and interestingly enough, the country, if you go to the U.S. Securities Commission and enter Canada into the search menu, Canada is actually a registered corporation owned by the United States, and the address for the head address for that corporation is the United States Embassy for Canada.
I am really not surprised to hear that. Free Men on the Land is a growing movement, and the reason for it is exactly what you were just stating, where how countries have become corporations and people have become entities of corporations, as opposed to us just being regular people. So a lot of people say, birth at home and avoid submitting birth certificates. And, I'm a mother, and I've had a look at the system wide awake from the beginning, and I don't know how that's possible, but I'm sure some people can do it. And I'm not too sure how I would feel about my daughter not being recorded, because we also have a high volume of child trafficking. So a lot of people are not made aware of the growing number of Canadian children that have gone missing. But I would like to have some trace of my daughter.
Absolutely, and there is principles in the Free Men on the Land group, obviously, that are reasonably accurate. However, what I don't agree with is anybody that seems to be standing up for their rights to the police, whether it be Calgary Police, the RCMP, are now being labeled under that umbrella as extremists and radicalists under the Free Men on the Land group. I myself was subjected to that and labeled a extremist because I took a stand during an incident last year with the Calgary police officer who abused his authority, and ultimately I was detained for exercising my legal rights under the Canadian Constitution and labeled an extremist and one of these free men on the land, which I've never had any affiliation with.
I'm not surprised to hear that, because historically we've been slowly losing, as Canadians, the education to knowing what your rights are. The idea of civil liberties is something that is a lot of people are misunderstanding what they are. So our pendulum on politics have gone so far right wing that now anybody who knows their rights is now labeled an extremist and a radical. Someone who stands up for clean water is somehow an extremist and radical, when these are the basics of life.
An eco-terrorist.
Exactly. These are the basics. So we need to start standing up and being wary that it is okay to exercise your democratic rights. It is okay to start getting affiliated with political parties that maybe you never heard of, whether it be the Canadian Action Party. There's the Pirate Party, a few different types out there that maybe people aren't really aware of. We do need to start having political engagement. I encourage people, if they do nothing, just join a party. If you join a party, your party has to do what the membership says. So no matter what party you're in, whatever your voice is matters. You just have to start to voice it. So,
Absolutely.
There are safe alternatives rather than going down to City Hall and putting up a picket sign if you're uncomfortable with that, which I understandably respect a lot of people are. On the same token, it is your democratic right to be able to go and do something like that. So on the flip side, maybe go outside your bubble a little bit and try doing something that you wouldn't normally do.
Absolutely, and I mean the biggest thing is people are becoming in a state of fear over being even able to peacefully protest, because as they peacefully protest now, we're being forced into a state of fear from the excessive amount of force that's being taken against people who want to simply voice their opinion. And to me, that is not a constitution. That is not democracy. That is a flat-out dictatorship, and it is being spearheaded by Mr. Stephen Harper, or what we'll soon be calling him, I'm sure, is Senor Harper. Because he seems to be following in the steps of Mr. Castro and several other dictators.
Well, where to start? I think the biggest part that I try to do is engage Canadians to remember that, on every November 11th, most people feel that, we have to honor our vets because some died, some were injured, and they tried to fight for our freedoms and our rights. Well, as a Canadian citizen, it is your obligation to fight for your democracy. So depending on which way you assume that to be is fine. But, engaging in a political party, engaging in the odd protest, writing to your MLAs, your MPs, these are ways that you start your own civic duty of engaging with your democracy. Many people feel that by voting, you are submitting to the government. Now, that may be true. My feelings towards that is that you can't expect political change from a system you never engage with. So your voice matters, but it really matters if you engage with the system to speak it. So then at least that way you can have Thomas Mulcair saying, we're not going to go that direction, or Justin Trudeau saying, we're not going to go that direction. At least this way you have a foot in the door and you can start guiding your own policies.
Absolutely. And I mean, I have heard some activists go to the extreme point of accusing certain government officials of strategically wiping out the ones that are pro-people. The unexpected or unexplained health conditions and otherwise.
What do you mean?
I had one individual who told me flat out that people like Peter Lougheed, Ralph Klein, who were in good health, suddenly didn't have such good health, and that our current government is sort of wiping out the people who were the people who were formerly in government, advocating for the people who could potentially pose a threat to their agenda.
There are lots of documentation of people in that position getting basically cancer given injections. Actually, the death of Hugo Chavez, whereas some people may see him as a dictator, and Castro, he used to actually tell him, you are too out in the public, people will try to kill you, and I'm pretty sure he would believe that he was murdered. There is tons of technology out there that can allow this to happen. So I'm not going to discount that concept because there's been many cover-ups that history has been rewritten incorrectly over.
Most definitely, and it seems we're coming to a point where those who are in power are threatened by those who have a voice. And the question that I push to people is, how many of them are in power? There's only 300 members of parliament. There's only a few hundred members of the legislative assembly in each province who lead our country and our province. But there's well over 30 million Canadians and maybe 100,000 police officers to hold us off if we all band together and start fighting for our rights and telling the people that we are not happy. The people that we voted to lead us.
There should be accountability and transparency to our MPs, and currently we are not seeing that. Just as we're talking about bank reforms, really we should be talking about democratic reforms in that sense. the fact that you can email an MP now and not ever get a response. You can leave a message and not get a response. That is not democracy. That's not being accountable. That's not being transparent.
Absolutely.
Again,
And my viewpoint on that is very simple. If you can't get a hold of them via email, they always have an office.
yeah.
Walk right down, knock on the door, and don't leave until either security kicks you out and you just come back the next day. Or B, they happen to show up and you say, hey, look, you're not busy now. Let's sit down.
Yeah. Well, and it should be that way, but as I experienced just recently at Harper's, that door is locked and you have to call for an appointment, which we had. So I don't understand the direction that Canadian democracy is going down.
Now, with that appointment that you had, was that directly with Stephen Harper, or was that with one of his representatives?
Yeah, it was just to come into his office and drop off some documents. It wasn't necessarily with Stephen Harper. And with the death of Margaret Thatcher, we were definitely not expecting Mr. Harper to be there.
Most definitely. I'm sure he was off in the UK vacationing and celebrating the death of Miss Thatcher. I suppose
I'm not sure.
Celebrating, but
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I did hear rumors that he was in town at the Sheldon Kennedy Center and such, but you know, regardless, we didn't expect to see him per se. As just an average citizen, I actually did try to make an appointment for my daughter. My daughter wanted to meet Mr. Harper. We have this cute little NDP coloring book. Not that I am NDP, but I don't have very many Stephen Harper coloring books that are available through any other party. So I bought it for her. And she's very convinced that Stephen Harper would sign it for her if we could just meet him. But there's conveniently a 4-year waiting list to have an appointment with Mr. Harper. So,
which obviously they were booking up well before he was elected then.
So, you know, unfortunately, that's not going to be possible now. He's not my MP, Deepak O'Brien is. So Deepak O'Brien is not in my daughter's coloring book. Otherwise, I would ask him to sign it as well.
Oh, there you go. And definitely that would be a gesture of appreciation to a fellow constituent for Deepak to, take the time to give that gesture.
That's right. Well, for a 5-year-old, it's a pretty big deal. And the other day when we did go, I had her miss school just in case there was an opportunity for her to pass off her Stephen Harper coloring book, and of course the door was locked. So.
Most definitely. And unfortunately, it seems like not just the doors to our MPs' offices are being locked, but the doors to Parliament seem to be locked up just as tight nowadays. You were somewhat involved with the I Don't Know More movement, and how that all started was that Stephen Harper refused to meet with the band chiefs to discuss simple topics and exercise what we would call a diplomatic process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that we forget, that there were promises made at the start of Canada with the treaties that have never been implemented. Many people feel that Aboriginals have special rights, but that actually isn't the case. It was supposed to be honoring the treaties, which have never been fully honored. So Chief Teresa Spence wanted to sit down and talk to Harper about his new legislation. And I don't know if I read this, but I was definitely under the impression that Harper's opinion was you don't deal with terrorists. And I thought, well, how is one of the chiefs who are First Nations a terrorist in your eyes? I was aware of the extra screening that we were getting, particularly about our eco-terrorism, but, to me, this was extreme. It's the very least that the Canadian Parliament can do is start to talk with the chiefs. And he seemed to be insulted that Patrick Brazeau was not a good enough representation, but that's not who she asked for. She asked for him. And a senator of the Conservative Party wasn't what she was looking for. At this point, she had met many of the other MPs, many of the other opposition leaders, even some senators.
Absolutely, and her being in a position where she herself is seen just as highly by her people, by the Indigenous people, as any of those people.
Well, to be honest about the I Don't Know More movement, you have to understand before the settlers came and implemented parliamentary law, there wasn't the chief and council system. Chief and council was literally imposed through the Indian Act. So First Nations had their own style of governance that was taken away immediately. They weren't allowed to do their style of governance. So because they've been implemented with this chief and council implemented by the Canadian government, there is corruption within not all of the bands, but many of the bands. And so there are a lot of First Nations that actually don't respect their chief and council. And the reason why is because this is a system of governance that wasn't actually what they were used to doing. It's open to corruption, which is probably why it was implemented in the first place. So,
I could certainly see our government's favoring some system that would give opportunity for corruption.
That's right. And, like it or not, just as Harper has been elected, Chief Spence was elected, and not everybody agrees with her. We don't really have official opposition parties in all of the First Nations. And, I would like to see there would be some changes like that. But, then you're starting to go against the Indian Act. Again, the need for consultation so that we can get some changes implemented that actually are beneficial to everybody. Just before we sing too many praises about the chief and councils, I just want to, give that caveat that there is a representation of First Nation as Harper is to me, which is not one at all. No. So not all chief and council are corrupt, but just to be fair, it is a form of governance that was implemented on the First Nations.
Most definitely, and I'm well aware of the corruption that happens within the First Nations. I have a family member that works for the Blood Tribe in southern Alberta, and firsthand she has seen how the leadership is misappropriating funds. It's supposed to be directed for the Aboriginal people, and it's not being managed well, and even the budgets for their healthcare system are being pocketed rather than properly budgeted in a lot.
Yeah, and you're not going to find First Nations that are going to disagree with that if they're at all involved actively. My own aunt was kicked off the board for basically calling out corruption as well. So, I think we have to be honest about, some of these chief and councils are not representation. It's easy for the Sun media to bring out the corruption and say, see these people, they're the problem, blah, 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 rather than looking at the systemic root issues here, that the reason why this was caused. I have encouraged people to read the Indian Act. I've encouraged people to read the treaty so that they can see how this has come to be, but we're not there yet, and we do have systematic racism, which is in the Indian Act, so we need to be aware of these things.
Absolutely. And with the Idle No More movement, obviously, people came together. There was a phenomenal amount of support and people coming together for a specific cause. How do we get people in Canada, regular Canadian citizens, not just for Nations people, but regular Canadian citizens, to unite this way and start speaking up in such great numbers that they are forced to listen? Because right now, they're running rampant and getting away with murder.
Idle No More is actually not just for First Nations, but it's also for the settlers, because ultimately the bills that Harper is pushing through is going to affect settlers as well. Right now, I don't know if you are aware of what FIPA is, but FIPA is this Chinese deal that's going to be over 31 years before you can even petition there to be a change. So my daughter's going to be well into her 30s before this. There's one small band that is trying to take this to court to block this until the next election. This is a great example of the First Nations standing up for all Canadians in an attempt to try to not tie them to a 30-year deal that will see through many different governments. So, rather than see it as an us and them, we are united. And the First Nations Idle No More movement is open to all Canadians, and in hopes to gain more support from all Canadians so that we can educate them as to what has been done historically as well as to right now, and how this will affect them and their babies too. My daughter, she's going to have to live with the implications of FIPA for the rest of her life. Whether it's good or bad, for the next 30 years, it's implemented. CETA was another example of something that's long-term, that's going to be affecting people at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels, where we're going to both have secrecy around them. There's not enough public debate. There's no public consultation. And yet these are deals that are going to tie our countries and possibly leave us in legal limbo in many ways, stopping small business owners, stopping big corporations. So I am surprised there's not more public outcry, even from the industries.
Absolutely, and what you were saying about stopping small businesses, as I said, I'm a small business owner myself, and I'm already seeing far too many symptoms of our democratic process being tarnished and small business owners being unable to succeed, either because of a lack of being able to find proper or adequate funding, being the biggest one, a lack of accountability, as you said, from representatives in the government level, and most importantly, a lack of accountability from the business community. It just seems like everybody is being restricted as a small business owner from growing because the big guys don't want to have competition.
Yeah, I know, and we are seeing more and more of that. I don't mean to pick on Walmart. They're just such an easy target to say. The Walmarts are really closing a lot of the small business opportunities.
They went down in infamy for that specific reason.
Exactly, and we're not going to see a lot of change until people start shopping elsewhere, doing other things. But at the same token, I'm friends with many mothers, and we're all excited about the new Walmart opening up on the east side here in a couple of years because it'll be closer and there'll be groceries there. Well, it's hard to educate everybody on this whole deal for sure.
Yeah, exactly, and it's becoming a situation where they're forcing us almost into a poverty state, and creating an impoverished nation intentionally, because ultimately, the guys who are at the top, who hold all the bread, are financially benefiting from this system that they've created, and they don't want to lose that power. So they're doing anything they can to suppress people with a voice, to contain the voice of people who are truly passionate about a better and a more free nation, so that we can all thrive. And they don't want to see us thrive because it's not profitable for them.
That's right. Yeah. In fact, they want to give you things like NHL hockey, the Flames hockey, and I understand having a winning Flames team and having a lot of fun with that. Dancing with Stars, we'll just keep everybody medicated with funny TV, and in the hopes they don't really start paying attention. Now, even Rick Mercer, Jon Stewart, these I think are diluted, but at least they're a start down that road.
Absolutely, and satire most definitely lightens the mood in a very tense situation. I'll admit that I'm a bit of a satirist myself. I will take the cynical approach and poke fun at people forgive my language, but for their fuck-ups.
Yeah. Well, honestly, if it wasn't for This Hour Has 22 Minutes or the Rick Mercer report, I just, sometimes I swear, am I the only person who's seeing this? And, they see the comedy in this, so it helps lighten my stance on a lot of this stuff, because I'm just glad I'm not alone.
Absolutely, and I have to say, one of my favorite moments was actually the Royal Canadian Air Force New Year special last year.
Oh yeah.
For 2012, they had, or for the 2013 New Year special, they had. We all remember Gangnam Style that became so popular on YouTube. Had a comical spin to that. The Royal Canadian Air Force did a Gangnam Style spin-off called Stephen Harper Style.
Oh, no. No. Now I'm going to be stuck YouTubing that and having to watch that. Oh, one other video I definitely want to encourage people to see is The Crime of the Canadian Banking System by Bill Abram. He is a retired school teacher, and he has a lot to talk about the history of the Bank of Canada and how we got where we got. So
absolutely, and that also ties in with the education system as well. I'm sure Bill is probably very well versed in how they're trying to teach Canadian citizens to be completely docile.
Yes, well, I've heard rumors that they've taken the parliamentary system directly out of the school system, so that they're not being taught how the parliamentary system works at all. My daughter, she is getting direct exposure to the parliamentary system, so we need to start encouraging all Canadians to be teaching their kids this, and we need them to be leading by example to their children.
Absolutely.
By getting engaged politically in whatever form that is.
Even if it's anarchy. Inclined.
Exactly. Even if it's anarchy, whether it's drawing pictures, whatever it is you do, just some kind of political inclination.
Absolutely. Well, Michelle, we've reached the end of the time block here. So thank you very much for joining us on the show. Just a few announcements before we wrap up. Once again, just a reminder to check us out if you enjoy our content at Fresh Politics on Twitter. Also check Fresh Politics on YouTube. And make sure you check us out. Coming soon will be our Facebook page. We'll keep you posted on that. Check out our Twitter and YouTube for updates. And also make sure, once again, that you check out, Fresh FM on Monday and Tuesday nights. We've got Get Buck Mondays. We've got your Tuesday night lineup as well. And coming soon, we've got our reggae show that'll be joining us prior to my own on Sunday nights here with a new reggae-based show that we'll be offering. And most importantly, a special thanks to the folks at Fresh FM who have made this show possible and have given me an opportunity to create awareness for political topics such as what we were discussing tonight. So once again, and a special thanks once again to Michelle Robinson for joining us here in studio. On that note, I'm going to leave you with one last note. I would like to say, make sure you stay politically inclined. Make sure you check us out. And also make sure that if you feel so compelled to send us an email at freshpolitics@gmail.com, because we'd be happy to accept donations to keep the show afloat here. So if you are interested in making a donation, by all means, send us an email or check us out online, any of those resources already mentioned. This is DJ DD Ben signing off on Fresh FM with Politically Inclined. And tune in next week for a very special episode.
Back,